Okay. My name is Don Vosberg, and I started working for Novell in December of 2003, which was just about the time of the Suse Linux acquisition. And now there's been a bit of a transition. For those of you who have sort of been following things, you probably know that the Attachmate Group purchased Novell in April of this year. So what we're actually now 4 IT companies that are all owned by the Attachmate Group Incorporated, which is a private investment firm. At that time, they made the Susa Linux portfolio a separate business unit. So I'm actually now D. Vosberg at Susa.com, and my focus is primarily on Suse Linux. So today's update is really going to be about the Suse Linux Enterprise portfolio. That said, those of you who are currently working with Open Enterprise Server will probably still realize that it runs on top of Suse Linux Enterprise Server. And in fact, the new update to OES that's coming out before the end of the year will be running on SLES 11 SP1. So what I'm going to talk about today is related to the Suse portfolio and updates to SLES and where we are currently. And if you have questions, I believe we're going to stop at 11:45 and have a few minutes for you to be able to ask additional questions at the end. So unfortunately, this slide did not translate well in my PDF, but just to try to understand where Linux comes from, it's much different from proprietary software because we start with a lot of open source projects at the top, including the kernel and XEN, Apache, LibreOffice, and numerous others that are developed sometimes very isolated and independent ways. And then we try to bring that together in the form of an open SUSE distribution that is, in fact, its own open source project that has a lot of leading edge stuff that's not always, and there's no guaranteed life cycle. It's pretty changeable, but it's a fun thing. So if you're an enthusiast and you enjoy playing around with Linux, it's completely free and available for you to download. The current version is 11.4. OpenSUSE 12.1 is due to come out in beta with the next release, but there's been a few delays. It was originally supposed to be today. I'm guessing that it will be before the weekend. And then all of that leads us up to Suse Linux Enterprise, which is a hardened product, and that's what we're talking about today. It has integration with all the leading hardware and software vendors, and a 7-year, it's actually a 10-year life cycle if you count the last 3 years of self-support, but a supported life cycle of 7 years, including all of the training and other things that are available to you around the Suse Linux Enterprise portfolio. So I know this slide is like a lot of stuff, so I'm not going to read all of it, but at least it lets you see what our portfolio is on the SUSE side of the product line. So primarily today I'm going to be talking about Suse Linux Enterprise Server, but we also have some additional products. I'm going to be talking about also mentioning Suse Manager and Susa Studio, which are in our systems management portfolio. And we're also, we'll talk a bit about cloud and virtualization. And then we have some special interesting support arrangements and some OEM arrangements. You see Suse Linux Enterprise Server for VMware, which is actually an OEM'd product from VMware. But all of it goes back to the base of Suse Linux Enterprise Server and the code base that represents that hardened stuff. So here's where things are in the current life cycle of Suse Linux Enterprise. So SLES 9, which is what OES, the original OES was based on, came to end of life this summer. So it was introduced in 2004 and end of life just this past summer. So we're not going to talk about SLES 9 anymore. As SLES 10 currently is at SP4, which was just released this year. That is the final support pack for SLES 10. So it will simply receive updates within that channel throughout the rest of its life cycle, which is through middle of 2013. SLES 11, which was introduced in March of 2009, is currently at SP1, and we're going to be talking a bit about what's coming to SP2 as well. So really my focus today is on SLES 11 SP1 and some of the enhancements and coming things in SLES 11 SP2 as well. So there's a life cycle. Notice one thing in particular, going out to 2013, that when SLES 10 hits end of life is when the time frame for SLE 12 to be introduced is. So we are currently now in a new era of only 2 supported releases of SUSE Linux Enterprise at a time. So going forward, it's just too difficult for our software and hardware vendors, and probably difficult for you too, to feel as though you can support 3 different versions of SUSE Linux Enterprise out there concurrently. So right now, only SLE 10 and SLE 11 are supported, and when SLE 10 falls off the map, SLE 12 will be introduced. So currently, SLE 11 is a focal point. SLES 10 development is relatively static and really more around patching as opposed to feature introduction. So what's new with SUSE Linux Enterprise? Now that you've seen the roadmap of things, let's take a little bit closer look at what we're actually doing right now. So SUSE Linux Enterprise 10 SP4 is the final service pack, as we mentioned. So it's a hardware enablement. So there were things that currently are out there in hardware that SLE 10 could not have anticipated when it was originally released in 2006. So we have an evolutionary update to the drivers for hardware. We've done some additional Microsoft Linux integration components for virtualization, both on running Windows on SLE 10 virtualized and for running SLE 10 under Hyper-V. So there's a lot of stability factors, obviously certification under those, and a consolidation of all the updates, and that's shipped in April of 2011. So if you have SLE 10 that is not running on SP4, the chances are you're either going to have to pay for extended support or upgrade to SLE 10 SP4. So I would highly recommend, if you're still on SLE 10, to get onto SP4. It's going to make support a whole lot easier for us and for you going forward. SP1 for SLE 11 was released last year. So here are some of the things that we've even enhanced since SP1 was released. We've updated Firefox, some continued SUSE Manager integration. We're going to talk about SUSE Manager. We've created the ability, a tool to be able to do an unattended upgrade from SLE 10 to SLE 11. And this is a unique differentiator for SUSE Linux. Red Hat does not have anything like that. They do not encourage direct migration from one to the next. They want you to do a moving workload, which in some instances makes a lot of sense. However, there are a lot of customers who want to be able to move from SLE 10 to 11. Obviously, with new hardware from Intel, the Sandy Bridge enablement is one of the things that we can't just tell our customers don't buy any Sandy Bridge stuff. So we enabled that in the process before the release of SP2. And we've updated pure FTPD to continue that network compatibility for FTP. And then obviously LibreOffice is being enhanced pretty regularly, so we're trying to maintain that. So on the Sandy Bridge enablement, right now we have some of the elements of that were delivered already in a kernel maintenance update that happened in March. But there are a lot of newer elements that are more difficult to port backwards into that kernel, including the graphics stack, the X11 stuff. So we're trying to make the most sense to be able to upgrade that, and really, in order to fully enable the Sandy Bridge stuff, it won't happen until SLE 11 SP2. So I see the question here about the unattended upgrade. And yes, that is in fact, the design is for it to go from SLES 10 SP3 or above to SLE 11. So if you're on a previous support pack, it's not supported. There's some reasons for that, and I don't know if I can go into that all right now, but there are definitely some reasons. We'll talk a bit about it when we come to system management, but thank you, good question. So some additional things that we're doing in the high availability extension, which is an add-on to SUSE Linux Enterprise unless you are running on advanced hardware like the mainframe or on System P. We've improved the load balancing, partnering with the working group at the Linux Foundation, which is kind of fun, and some cluster health check promotion things. We've been improving the tools, and the fencing with multiple SBD devices is really useful. If you haven't looked at our high availability stack since SLE 10, you are missing it, because there's a lot of excellent things that are in SP1 and above. I'm not going to have time today to be able to give you the details of all of that, but suffice it to say that the high availability stack, which is primarily based on open source projects, is very robust and much enhanced since SLE 10. So what's coming next is SUSE Linux Enterprise 11 SP2. It is currently in Beta 5, which was released earlier this month. So obviously, every time we issue a support pack in the life cycle of SUSE Linux Enterprise, the goal is to hardware enable it, so to make it so it will take advantage of the hardware that customers are purchasing today. One of those inclusions is the RAS features that are being integrated into chipsets from both Intel and AMD, among others. We're also trying to do something where we are more aligned on the Unix takeout portion with historically available features such as the advanced file system things that are available on Oracle Solaris. So I got a question before I dive into this any farther. OES. OES is an overlay. Currently, the current version of OES is only on SLES 10, but it is coming, and if you go to BrainShare, I'm sure you will see many presentations. In fact, I spoke with the person who is talking about the next version of OES that will be running on top of SLES 11, but currently OES is only on SLES 10. So, yeah, I'm probably not going to be. I'm sort of out of the OES loop for the balance of my portfolio today. So I'm going to try to focus on SUSE Linux Enterprise. But again, Yeah. Yeah, OES2 SP3 runs on SLES 10 SP4, right. I got a question on SUSE Linux 11 can only be installed on a 64-bit machine. Actually, that's incorrect. SUSE Linux Enterprise can be installed on everything from an x86 all the way up through a System Z mainframe. So if you have a box, it can get installed on there. Now, obviously, there are some features that would make a lot more sense on higher-end hardware, or obviously in a virtualization deployment model too. So I actually have a SUSE Linux Enterprise 11 server that's a Pentium 3 with 256 meg of RAM, but I use it to pass out IP addresses and to remotely access from a command line some of the elements on a network. But yeah, certainly it's not necessary to be 64-bit, and particularly if you're going to be playing around, it's fine. So, but OES, yeah, that is correct. Thank you for that. That OES 11 is going to only be 64-bit. And most of our customers today on the server side are deploying 64-bit stuff. A couple other things. On SLES 11 SP2, we're focusing on a file system of BTRFS. And I'm going to explain about that in a little bit more detail here. Also, there is the ability for you to create container support based on control groups and using some of the elements that we're enhancing with SP2. Also, we're following a new maintenance model for SUSE Linux Enterprise that makes the service packs less monolithic and start with a base to be able to make it easier for our customers to maintain supportability. Historically, we've asked customers to switch to a new service pack within 6 months of the release, and some of them have found that to be burdensome, and the service packs have in the past have forced people into an application recertification process that's taken an extensive amount of time for them to do implementation. And we really don't want to tie our customers' hands, and we want them to be able to focus on supportability and being on the latest version, making it easier instead of harder. You'll notice also that we're going to be offering a snapshot and rollback. This is part and due to the BTRFS model and the libzip model, and I think when you see OES 11, you will understand zip a little better. But zip is ZenWorks and YAST package protocol that is the update stack that's behind SLE 11 and following. There is a limited version of that was ported back to SLE 10. If you look at SUSE Manager, you'll see some of the newer zipper stuff as well. So here's some of the key elements of SUSE Linux Enterprise 11 SP1 and following, and hopefully this will be some fun stuff. So obviously scalability is one of the things that you want to be able to have in terms of deployment. Right now you can, we have control groups with kernel resource management. You can scale your hardware out to 4,096 CPUs on 64-bit Intel, or 1,024 CPUs on the Power platform. So if you're running the IBM Power stuff, it scales out pretty widely. And even with System Z, of course, it's even greater. You can compute huge amounts of data in memory. This is why a lot of the high-performance compute models are running on SUSE Linux kernels. A huge amount of, I actually had a customer call, it had an SGI box with 1,100 CPUs, and we were trying to figure out pricing. It's very interesting, but we certainly can support that, especially on an HPC-type model. We also support the XFS file system currently, and sizes up to 8 exabytes. So I think that's more than what most customers are requiring. I'm not finding people get stuck there. I am working with a very large customer on tuning XFS, because when you get into that kind of scale, it becomes more challenging. So this is in the 4th generation of our OS now. It's 8+ years. It's really, we've enhanced things a lot. Where it's going in the future in terms of scalability, obviously we want to be able to increase the number of cores, as those are being changed rapidly by chip manufacturers and most of our hardware vendors, and include the possibility for them to do advanced scheduling or power management to try to control costs, and to be able to take advantage of those things without it breaking the bank. So we're also continuing XFS and introducing a supported version of BTRFS. Obviously, NFS is still a key component, although a lot of people have had trouble with NFS v4. We're planning to use PNFS, which is a broader support channel, but not until 2012 or later. And then service support within the high availability stack for that. Virtualization support today, obviously, we have full support within the platform for both XCN and KVM. We also continue our perfect guest strategy, so no matter what hypervisor makes most sense in your environment, you're welcome to use Suse Linux as a guest under that, because deployments are not always the same. I mean, you will find people who have a mix of VMware ESX at the core in the data center, and then a distributed environment that's using XCN or KVM or even Hyper-V in that process. So, and we're going to talk a bit about the appliance program in Susa Studio in a bit. We have a unique licensing arrangement for virtual machines. So right now, if you buy Susa Linux Enterprise 11 SP1, you have an unlimited number of virtual machines per physical server with one subscription. So this is part of what the basis of our arrangement with VMware is. So the VMware, the Susa Linux Enterprise for VMware actually gives them the rights within ESX to run as many SLES 11 instances from VMware as correlates to their ESX licensing. So it's much more aggressive than it is for Red Hat. Yes, and the answer is yes. SLES 10 SP4 is what's underneath OES 2 SP3, okay? So virtualization tomorrow, where it's going, obviously KVM is improving, and we're taking advantage of the upstream things, including adding Windows support for KVM. We're upgrading XCN, which currently is at 4.02 to 4.1. So you will have some improvements in terms of lower latency and additional fault handling and scalability enhancements, and better guest support for the running underneath Hyper-V and ESX. Obviously, those are still critical platforms. As you see, so many of our customers and everybody doing virtualization on a broad swath of different hypervisors. We're also working on the container technology and soft partitioning, and I won't go into that in detail, but it's happening. Obviously, cloud stuff is something that is a buzzword and in much discussion, and everyone strategizing in terms of how they're going to deploy and implement cloud strategy. We already have the ability today to run Susa Linux Enterprise on Amazon EC2. We have full support for both SLES 11 and SLES 10. It gives you a very cost-effective cloud pricing module, and you can actually deploy appliances directly from Studio into EC2 if you already have an account. So there's a lot of features that we already take advantage of on the EC2 side. And we're doing an additional cloud strategy in the future that I can't talk about just yet, but it's coming. I can promise you. One of the things that proves that we're ready for the cloud right now is Susa Studio. So if you haven't had a chance to look at susastudio.com and create some appliances, I would encourage you to do that, to create your own account, and you can actually use a template or your own template or choose from the gallery of public templates to be able to create your own appliances, whether it's SLES or SLED, and have a good time doing that for nothing, creating your own, and then you can also share them. At the same time, we have the Susa Studio on-site tools that allow you to customize and build those kind of appliances yourself that can include repositories that are not necessarily public-facing. So, so we have a studio on-site, or you can use the online version for free. This gives you some additional tools, including lifecycle management and the ability to be able to use WebIOS to manage it, and including your own stuff. So where are we going in terms of file system? If you followed SUSE Linux a long time, you probably remember RiserFS, and then moving to ext3, and Red Hat introducing or making ext4 the default file system. Where are we going in terms of file system enhancements? So BTRFS is our direction. If you look at what is supported currently under SLES 11 SP1, these are the feature sets. So I'm not going to go over this eye chart in detail, but you can see basically we have 5 different file systems. OCFS2 is a clustered file system only supported with the high availability enhancement pack. The others are included. BTRFS was included with SLES 11 SP1 as a technology preview. So, that's where the file systems are currently. What we believe, and ext4 is actually also supported, but only as a tech not supported, but included as a tech preview. We do not see ext4 as being the file system of the future. There are a lot of issues around it, so we're not going to include ext4. So, BTRFS, what it is the better FS, basically. It has a number of features that are very unique. Integrated volume management, for example. So instead of a separate LVM module, it's actually built right into the file system, which allows you to create very powerful snapshot capabilities. And you can do copy on write. It scales pretty amazingly. You can do other things like compression and data integrity with checksums and SSD optimization, which is certainly a growing technology. And as that continues to be deployed in enterprise, something that handles SSD well is certainly important. So here's the status of where BTRFS is, included as a tech preview on SLE 11 SP1. So you can actually go and play around with it now with what's out there. It will be fully supported in SLES 11 SP2. And the plan is by the time SLE 12 is introduced in 2013, that it will in fact be the default file system. So BTRFS has come a long ways. Here are some of the reasons why we've chosen it. It really is the rising star. So it takes a lot of the ideas from the past, XFS, RiserFS, and ext2 and 3 that we have, and we have actually implemented some of those in the past, and summarizes a lot of those ideas. So conceptually, what ZFS does on the Solaris side, and ZFS is also available on BSD, This is similar conceptually as ZFS. So ZFS is really an awesome file system if you're familiar with it. It's built for this kind of scalability and extensibility that we would expect from a future type file system. So you can do some offline migration from the EXTs to BTRFS if you wish, but it's coming, and we're going to be the first, probably the first enterprise release with support for BTRFS. As soon as SLES 11 SP2 releases, we will be. So along the way, you may have heard that Suse Linux also released a management product, which came out in March of this year, called Suse Manager. We have operating system lifecycle management that's included with this tool that allows you to do some utilization and managing of multiple vendors, so we can actually manage both Red Hat Enterprise Linux and Suse Linux Enterprise. With the first release, we support SLES 11. With a release that is coming in the next few weeks, SLE 10 will also be supported. OES is in the radar. I've had some discussions about that. You will hear more if you go to BrainShare on how OES support is done in Suse Manager. But this is how it works for Suse Linux Enterprise itself. You have the Customer Center, and Suse Manager connects to it and manages the systems not just with updates and patches, but it can do push things for deployment, push things for configuration. You can scale it out with proxy server as well, so it can go to thousands and thousands of instances in the process. So there are 3 modules that are a part of Suse Manager. You have provisioning, management, and monitoring. The base module requires the management agent on the boxes. It's much, much thinner than ZCM or ZenWorks Linux Management was. It's a daemon that checks back every 4 hours and runs one single simple command, and it's low overhead on the box. So even if you're deploying it on a very minimal instance of SLES with, for example, in an appliance situation, you can lay on the Suse Manager client without it bogging down the box or adversely affecting performance. So we also include a provisioning module that allows you to manage different configuration files. The question is, how does it compare to SMT? So SMT is only meant to handle patches and updates to proxy what is there in Novell Customer Center. Suse Manager allows you to do much, much more than that. You can do push updates. You can do provisioning of boxes with integrated with AutoYast and the distribution itself. You can actually set up monitoring for these boxes so you can see what's going on real time and get reporting. And the comprehensive graphical interfaces all through the web. It's based on the upstream project Spacewalk, which was the underlying factors for Red Hat Satellite Server. So much of the work that's already done in very mature satellite server project carries forward directly in terms of application interface and integration with third-party tools. It's an excellent tool that, even though we just introduced it in March, it's extremely mature and the interface is very strong. So it's much more in-depth than what you would get with SMT, which is simply a reflection of your Novell Customer Center that requires the clients to pull back out their updates.